USCHO.com. This is the USCHO Weekend Review podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online at USCHO.com. A look at this weekend in college hockey and a review of the top news of the week.
Welcome to USCHO Weekend Review for Monday, February 14th, 2022. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly and Derek Schooley. This podcast is brought to you by DCU Digital Federal Credit Union. What will DCU mean to you? Find out today by visiting dcu.org. Membership required. Well, let's start out here with the Big Ten, gentlemen. If you look at the out-of-conference winning percentage, the Big Ten had the best one this year. That brings up the question, is the Big Ten the best conference in college hockey?
Wow, you're going right to the heavy topics right off the bat. You're gonna make everybody go on the spot. Everybody in Hockey East will hate Jimmy. Everybody in all the other conferences will hate me. I think right now, yes. I think they are proving it on a daily basis. I think the NCHC is really good. I don't think there's much a separation, but I think the way that you're seeing these teams come together and play right now, I think yes, because they're doing it without their best guys. And the top teams are still winning. They're still going. And my quick answer to that before we dive into team by team is yes.
I'm going to go right with you there, Derek. And I'll put a caveat to it. I don't know that top to bottom, all 7 teams in the Big Ten are great. I think that Penn State is struggling. I really think that Michigan State is a team that, maybe just didn't have it this season, despite the fact that they've been in some good games and they've pulled off some big wins. But you look at the top of that conference right now, those top 4 teams, Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio State, Notre Dame, all of them are NCAA tournament bound teams as of this moment. You've got in the pairwise, you have Michigan sitting right there at the top and, not too far down Minnesota. They're performing really well right now, despite a lot of challenges. I think that, the top 4 teams in that conference are deadly. And I would not want to face, say, in an NCAA tournament, if Notre Dame's a 4 seed, I wouldn't want to be the 1 seed that has to face Notre Dame, because that is a team that can get things done in a single game scenario. Are they consistent week to week? No, they're a little inconsistent. That's probably the reason that they're not sitting at the top of the Big Ten. They have a lot of talent, though. I think in terms of a talent league, I think, by far the Big Ten has the most talent in college hockey.
And I may even challenge you on the bottom of the league. If you compare Penn State and Michigan State to Miami and Colorado College, that's probably an even matchup, or maybe advantage Big Ten there too.
Yeah, maybe not the best Monday to be talking about that, with Miami having a great sweep of Omaha this weekend, at home. But yeah, I agree. I think that, CC and Miami have not probably performed as well as some of the bottom teams in the Big Ten. But, I will say that, I look at Hockey East and we keep, saying they're probably, in numbers bear it out, they're probably the 3rd best league this season. Their bottom is very strong. I look at Maine and Vermont, and I wouldn't want to play them in a playoff series because they're very good teams. Maine just knocked off UMass on Friday night, and that's a really good UMass team. So I look at, in terms of the talent in the league, Big Ten really does have it this year. And it's pretty impressive what they've been able to do to build this conference in a short amount of time. But, at the same time, I think that there's plenty of other strengths in college hockey, but you asked the straight out question, is the Big Ten the strongest conference? I think yes.
Well, let's talk about 2 specific teams. How about Minnesota? Everybody was ready to kind of back off on Minnesota when Jack LaFontaine turned pro, but Justin Close now 8-3-0 in a starter, and they're 4-0 since they lost guys to the Olympics.
Well, I think, first of all, you're also, to jump on Jimmy's point there, you're also talking about the big boys of college hockey. I mean, they got the big budget, they got the charters, they've got everything. They should be, as some of the high-end NCHC and some of the other, they should be the best. I mean, this is set up for them this conference is set up for them to be the best conference. So they're doing what they're supposed to do. as is the NCHC in their time. That's why they put the super conference together, the NCHC. They're doing what they're supposed to do. So just to follow up on that a little bit, as far as Minnesota goes, this might be Bob Motzko's best coaching job. The adversity that he's had, I would champion Bob for Coach of the Year in that league right now. Personal adversity with Bob, having to deal with the loss of his son, which would, and he's got to go to work every day and be in the same business that his son. That hard. Hats off to Bob for the way he's handled that. Losing Jack LaFontaine, your starting goalie, All-American, losing players to the Olympics. I mean, you go down the list, and this is Bob Motzko's best job. We all wrote him off when they lost LaFontaine and then lost to Alaska. They then, since then they've beat Michigan in overtime. Then they lost to Michigan, but they're 4-0-1. I mean, in the one, or actually, I'm sorry, 5-0-1 and they lost that one game in the overtime to Notre Dame. I got to watch what I say because I misspoke a couple weeks ago and I got ripped on by a few people on Twitter. So I got to make sure I get all my stats right. But arguably, best job Bob Motzko's done in coaching hockey. And he had some really good St. Cloud teams. He's won a national championship as an assistant. Hats off to Bob and where they've put themselves.
Yeah, having known Bob for going back to his St. Cloud days, he's a guy that wears his heart in his sleeve. And it's so easy to be in adversity and maybe not say the right thing. But and because of that, maybe you anger some people, but you can also, lose a locker room. When he went through the LaFontaine stuff, he supported his team. And I loved the way he dealt with all this adversity this year, beyond his son, which is just a tragedy, from the last off season. But you look at the Olympics and, knowing that you're going to, really lose a chunk to the Olympics, that's very difficult, losing your goaltender. And that you're in position in a year where you've got a team that everybody looks at inside your own conference as just an absolute power club in Michigan. And, the coaches had enough faith in Minnesota to vote them top in the preseason poll, but I'm not sure that everybody on the outside did. So he faced a lot of outside scrutiny of his program. And I think that is one of the top 3 toughest markets to play in college hockey. Their fans are brutal when there's not success in Minnesota. I know that they're great when there is, but man, they're a brutal fan base when you have a little adversity in that program. So I say hats off to you. And I agree, Derek. Coach of the year in my mind in the Big Ten and possibly nationally when you really look at it. I mean, that's a guy that deserves serious consideration for the Penrose Award.
Let's turn to the other team in the Big Ten doing really well, Michigan. They're now number 1 in the pairwise after the sweep of the Spartans over the weekend. They were getting a lot of flack first from the GLI debacle and now an investigation that appears to be going on, but they've lost Olympians. Also the same as Minnesota has, but the Wolverines, they're probably another team that are doing exactly what they are supposed to be doing.
They dismantled their in-state rival. I don't even think the games were 6-2 and 7-3, but I watched part of the one game. I don't think they were that close. That was like you said, they beat the teams they should have beat without their big guns. They didn't have the hardest schedule. Wisconsin's in it. I think they're at 5 in the 5th in the league, and Michigan State's in last, but 4-1, 5-1, 4-3. I mean, then their hardest game was against the development program at 4-3. Then they go 6-2, 7-3. I mean, those are big wins with losing their big guns. I mean, now I guess you could argue that maybe they should have played Western Michigan without their big guns.
You won't drop that Western Michigan alum.
That's my alum talking coming out.
I think that, maybe some of the issues that they've had that you mentioned, the Western Michigan GLI debacle, some of the stuff that's come out about last year's NCAA tournament. Listen, if anything, that might have fired up a team. And it's easy for Mel Pearson, and we know Mel as a guy that can use the right tools for motivation. Mel Pearson can go into a locker room and use this material as an us against the world, and take a team that is absolutely 100% supposed to be the favorite going into this season and make them feel like massive underdogs. And when you do that with a college age kid, you can convince any player that if they're an underdog, they're going to go out and they're going to, go right through a wall for you. And I think that that's what we're seeing from Michigan right now. And the schedule may be fortunate. You end up, with one of your series, while you're missing guys at the Olympics is against, the bottom of your league. But that's a rivalry series, as you pointed out, Derek, and they handled Michigan State. I know the second night was a little closer at times in the score, but they handled Michigan State, and they're doing the right things. These are two clubs that everybody thought should just be dead for the next month of losing guys. They're going over to Beijing. What if they get COVID while they're on the road? They could have to stay an extra 2 weeks. When you come back, all that travel, and we'll see what travel does to these clubs as we get toward the playoffs, and what the Beijing travel did to some of these players. And that goes for every Olympic player. But I'm really impressed with both Minnesota and Michigan coming out of this.
And I like to joke, obviously, about the Western Michigan thing, and I bring it up, but you made a good point there. These are Mel Pearson, the job that he's done coaching this team, whether the wounds have been self-inflicted or not, he's done an outstanding job of motivating this team and getting into where they're number one in the pairwise. So I don't want that to, like I said, whether the wounds are self-inflicted or not, the job that he's done within the locker room has been outstanding.
Well, let's take a look at some teams that maybe had a little bit of a slip up this week, putting their at-large chances maybe in peril. One of them is UMass Lowell. Losses to Northeastern and to UNH have dropped them from 14th, which is just on the hairy edge of the pairwise, to 16th, which would be out of the at-large tournament. What happened with UMass Lowell, Jim?
I haven't gotten to see them in person a lot recently, but it's kind of surprising. It's amazing, and Derek, you can speak to this better than I. Sometimes with college athletes, you just peak too early, and that doesn't mean you can't repeak and hit another peak as you get toward the playoffs. But it feels like there was a time there when Lowell got up to, I guess, 8 or 9 in the pairwise. And, Owen Savory, everybody was talking about him because he had a goals against average of about 1.1, 1.2, somewhere in there, a save percentage in the 940s, 950s. And then Lowell went through a weekend where they played Maine twice, and they actually won both of those games. But both nights they took 3-0 leads in the game, and then let those leads never slip away, but slip. And they were in a situation that both nights there was a pull goalie situation. I can't remember the finals off the top of my head. But Owen Savory gave up 3 goals in each of those games. I'm not sure since then that he has had a game where he gave up less than 3. I think there might have been one where he gave up 2, but. So the little things, an extra goal against a game is hurting them. And then you look at Sunday's game at New Hampshire, and, New Hampshire's trying to move up the standings. They have a lot to play for right now. And whether it's goaltending or not, they got shut out 3-0. First time all year they've been shut out. And when you're shut out, you can't even blame goaltending because it doesn't matter what the goaltender did. You didn't score a goal. You weren't winning that game anyway. So this is a team, and we know Norm Bay's in playoff teams. They are always good. They made 6 out of the last 8 Hockey East championship games. That's a pretty good track record in the playoffs. This might be the adversity you can use, catapult off it, but they do need to kind of right the ship sooner. They're at-large chances, which I think last week we said we're at 82%. I know right now they're about 50-50 to make the tournament.
Yeah, it's crazy how things changed there in a quick hurry for some of these teams. And I know we'll continue to talk about them, but I mean, you look at where teams were and where they're going and how quickly that they fell off. And I mean, it's just, you talked about peaking too early, and sometimes you you're leaking oil at the wrong time. And I remember a Bemidji State team, right before they went to the Frozen Four, really struggled, and we ended up playing them in Des Moines. They were a pretty good team. They had the talent, and it just wasn't that time in that year. And you look at where they've gone, and Lowell. I don't want to write Lowell off because they are so close, but they got swept by Merrimack, and then they got a win over Northeastern, and then lost to UMass, and then beat BC. You got Dartmouth where they got a win, but these two games this last weekend, it's like they're on a little bit of a roller coaster. Win a couple, lose a couple, and their games against Bentley got postponed, where those were two other chances to get some wins. So, I mean, there's a lot going on right now with their roller coaster that they're doing. And like you said, don't count out Norm and the job that he's done, but they got to get the ship righted in a hurry. And their schedule isn't completely challenging, but these are two big games against Providence. Then you follow up with, again, a game with Long Island and a home and home with New Hampshire. So the only thing is they've got 3 of the next 5 at home. We'll see where that takes them. But their schedule isn't really, really overwhelming, but it's going to be a challenge.
Another team that dropped a little bit in the pairwise, although still well within the at-large range, is Michigan Tech. They had a big win, 8-1 at their big rival, Northern Michigan, on Tuesday, and then a split at Bowling Green, a 4-0 win and a 4-2 loss that dropped them from 8th to 10th. I don't think that's taking them too far in the other direction, but it shows you how just one loss can bump you down. And if you're getting close to that line, one loss can make you in or out at this time of year.
Yeah, I don't know if they're going to have that much trouble. They've got Ferris State on the road for 2 this weekend, and Ferris is playing much better lately. They're they got to go to Ferris. They're going to get a bonus point if they get wins on the road. But then they've got Mankato at home for 2, which potentially could sew up the 1-2 seeds of the tournament. They get 1 against Mankato, I think they're going to be in a pretty good spot. They do what they do with getting the bonus points at Ferris. They get 1 at home against Mankato. And I really don't know if those losses will really kill them that bad if they don't get 1 of 2. But you better do your job in the first round of the playoffs. You better do your job. Don't put yourself on that bubble by losing in the first round of playoffs. I think Tech's going to be fine, though.
Yeah, I agree, Derek. You get 1 against Mankato, you're all set. I look at they were in the 80% range, I believe, last week, and I have them about 58% now to get in. But that one series, if you take 1 game out of there, I think you're okay. You just can't drop anything else. You can't drop the games that you're still supposed to win. And, that's when we always talk about these probabilities to make a tournament. They're really based on the fact that, the computer is saying you're going to play this team 100 times. You're going to win 97% of those games. You've got to win those 97%. You've got to win it. You can't have the 3% come up in those games. So I think that, when I look at Tech, I think they're in a pretty good position still in the pairwise. But in terms of just, really cementing the tournament for them, they're not there in my mind yet.
You know what? And that's the funny thing is we sit here and we look at the future of where we're going. I think sometimes you got to look at the past too. And you look at the past of, and as coaches, you always do that. I've walked in the locker room before and said, this game, and it may be in November or maybe in December, this game may cost us in the future. And you don't know when it could be. You don't know. It could hold you a spot in the playoffs. It could do something. But they had their GLI per se, a tie with Michigan really helps them, but the loss against Michigan State kind of hurts them a little bit. And you throw in a couple other ones that happened at the beginning of the year, that's where you get into, the problems. And there are those games that you look back and you may think, oh, it's just a game in November, but eventually that may be the game that costs you. Not the games right now where you're looking, I got to do this for the pairwise. You look at that game you want back.
Yeah, I think, another team we just talked about, Lowell, they're in the same situation. A game against LIU that they tied, and a tie against Michigan State earlier in the season. Those aren't losses, and understand that it doesn't feel as bad. Maybe in the locker room afterwards, okay, at least we got a tie out of this one. We didn't lose, but both of them were at home. You're still only getting 50% of the pairwise, and that's reduced by 20% because it was on home ice and not on the road. So, yeah, those moments, even though that I think both of those, one came in October, one I think came in November, you have those moments in your season, and you don't think about it all the time when it happens, but then you can look at it when you get to March and say, if only.
Well, there's some teams heading in the other direction, and people probably have been sleeping on Clarkson. Okay, they beat Quinnipiac 3-1. That moves them from 18th to 15th in the pairwise. But get this. The last loss for Clarkson was January 8th to New Hampshire. And the last time Clarkson lost an ECAC game was November 6th against RPI. There's something like 12-0-4 in that stretch inside the conference. They're still trying to work their way up, but this is an example of where the poor out-of-conference record for the ECAC is hurting its teams. That season off and people transferring out, that's got to be hurting them. In a normal year, this kind of a Clarkson record might put them 8, 9, 10 in the pairwise.
I think you're also looking at, you've got what Clarkson's done, but I know this is a hot topic of yours, Ed. You got some teams that are really at the bottom, really pulling them down. And I don't know how much they can continue to climb. But that was a big win for them to kind of, mark their territory for the playoffs against Quinnipiac. I don't think there's anything that Quinnipiac, unless they go on a massive trouble, the Quinnipiac's going to be in. But there's not a lot that's really going to help Clarkson down the stretch here. You got Colgate and Cornell on the road, then you got Yale and Brown at home. And, the Cornell game could help you a little bit. The only thing that's really going to help you is, going 4-0 on that. You got to go 4-0 on that, being on the bubble. I don't know, Jimmy, you're the numbers guy. What does it say?
Well, I believe that if my numbers are kind of accurate, Clarkson is not in as good a shape, even though they're on the bubble. Their wins won't do as much as other teams' wins will do over that time. So I have them a little over 30% to make the tournament. And that includes the chances of winning the ECAC championship, which they're probably only in the 10% range when you consider Quinnipiac's in your league, even though you just beat them. But, I look at the bottom 12 in RPI nationally, and you have Union, St. Lawrence, Brown, Dartmouth, and Yale all in the bottom 12 of the RPI. No other conference has that many teams in the bottom 12. Even Atlantic Hockey, I believe, only has 2 teams. They have, Holy Cross and Air Force are bottom 12. Everybody else is higher than that. You have Ferris State from and St. Thomas from the CCHA, but that's it. A couple of Hockey East teams in there as well. But I mean, that just shows the as you were pointing out, Ed, the strength of the ECAC is really dragged down by the bottom of that conference. We talked about kind of Hockey East having a pretty good top to bottom conference, and a couple of teams in the NCHC of Michigan State and Penn State in the Big Ten that aren't really overly performing, but you don't see Michigan State or Penn State in that bottom 12. 5 teams from one conference in the bottom 12 of the RPI is really what's probably hurting the ECAC and all of its teams right now. Quinnipiac, yes, their footing is great. Nobody else.
Well, let's quickly talk about 2 other teams because we're going to talk about them more in the second segment when we get to the Beanpot. Northeastern beat BC in the Beanpot semis and also beat UMass Lowell. They moved from 17 to 14. BU beat Harvard in the Beanpot and beat Providence, so they're now 18th, all the way up from semi-meaningless 43rd on December 1st. But those 2 teams, one of them is going to be helped and one of them is going to be hurt tonight. Are either of these teams in a position to cement an at-large right now?
I'll just go real quick because Jim's there and he's the expert. I am shocked at what BU's done. I was on the buy sell. I sold. I think one of our favorite. I sold on that, and look where they're at right now. So I'll let Jim handle this one in depth. But I was wrong as of now.
Yeah, we just talked about Clarkson. I give both Northeastern and BU a higher odds of getting in the tournament than I do Clarkson. I have BU somewhere around 45%. I have Northeastern closer to 70%. So, like you mentioned, we'll talk about the Beanpot in the next segment tonight. The fact that these two teams actually meet probably is not good for the loser in terms of their NCAA hopes. But I'm really impressed with BU. I kind of expected this. I think I said it way back in like November or maybe after they lost to Cornell. And I think at that point that was when they were 43rd in the pairwise. At that time, I said if they get healthy, they could be a good team. They were just banged up. They had lost the equivalent of their first line. And when you have all of those players back, and they are all healthy, I just love the way this team's playing right now.
Yeah, but they've still lost their goalie, and look what they're doing. I mean, that's the thing. They don't have their. I mean, I know we're jumping ahead of segments, but we talked about that time, the do or die time, right around December 1st when they had Cornell, New Hampshire for 2, BC, all right before Christmas, and we thought that was the defining time for this team. And here we are. So good job by Albie to get the team back and going. And whether you say that they're losing their top players, I mean, they still lost some and their goalie too.
And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we return. A break now for our sponsor, DCU Digital Federal Credit Union. Visit dcu.org.
This is the USCHO Weekend Review podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online.
Sometimes it's not about wanting a new car, it's about needing one. And I needed one I could rely on. So I got an auto loan with DCU. They offer the same low rates on both new and used cars, and I was able to borrow a little extra to make a used car as good as new. My auto loan from DCU means a ride I can finally rely on, which feels like a pretty big thing. What will DCU mean to you? Insured by NCUA. Membership required. Visit dcu.org.
Welcome back to USCHO's Weekend Review podcast. The Beanpot final is tonight. And the teams that were using their backup goaltenders both won on Monday. BU, a 4-3 win over Harvard. Now, we talk about these as backups. Vinny Duplessis played a ton last year when Drew Comesso was unavailable. And then the guy that really impressed me watching that was the freshman JT Semptimphelter. He looked phenomenal, except for the equipment being tossed in the back. It was like he had won the tournament already and thrown his gear off. But those two guys really stepped up. And, well, why don't we take a moment and just preview tonight? I'm looking forward to watching this game. I think it's going to be terrific. Jim, you're going to be in the building. I mean, what's your take on this tournament final tonight?
Well, the best part for the tournament for both of these schools is that the two best fan bases of the tournament, Northeastern and BU, are in the final. And that, when these two teams meet, BU BC is the rivalry. Everybody knows that. But when Northeastern and BU meet, for one thing, when the Garden was rebuilt in whatever the 90s, for the Beanpot, and it's never changed that I can remember, they labeled where each four teams' sections are in terms of fan bases. They put BC and BU across from each other so you wouldn't have fights in the stands. Well, the two they put next to each other were BC and Northeastern. And these fan bases are face-to-face, and they yell, and they are loud, and it really creates a great atmosphere. But, I think in a game, you just talked about JT Semptimphelter, and his performance last week against BC was phenomenal. If he can steal a game, I think he has to. I think that when you really look at the teams, the way they're playing, although I was really impressed with Northeastern, their win over Lowell on Friday, I think that you're looking at the better depth is probably inside that BU locker room. But that's why you play the game. It's a single game. And if Semptimphelter can play like he did against Boston College last week, steal a game, you never know who ends up. And the one thing I will point out, I think I said this last week, nobody in any locker room except Northeastern's has won this tournament. Northeastern has won 3 in a row. They didn't play last year. So you're going back 5 years since the last time somebody else won this tournament. The experience really does favor the Huskies.
And we don't have a final that we talked about last week. It still will not happen. What was it? Harvard Northeastern?
Harvard Northeastern. I tweeted it the second that Harvard lost, I tweeted it out, and people still are, I guess it's a fact that a lot of people just don't know. They're still amazed. We've now played 69 Beanpots, and those two teams have never met in the championship game.
But
a statistical anomaly.
But 33% of the time it can't happen.
They can't.
So we're talking 40 times. We're only talking 40 times. So that's Jimmy. You're being in the building. You've got this. I'll defer to you. That's an expert analysis on the Beanpot and the history too. I mean, how can you get? I mean, you got to take credit for that. You got to copyright that stat.
Until the day it dies, it will die someday. Yeah. I don't know if I'll die first, but it will die someday.
We're on the midst. We're on the back nine of our lives, and that they don't seem to. They're playing extra holes on that stat.
How about that U.S. Olympic team? 3-0 in the preliminary round gives them the automatic to the quarterfinal. 8-0 over China, 4-2 over Canada, and a 3-2 win over Germany. They're going to face the winner of Germany and Slovakia. How are the prospects for this team for a medal? And dare we say it, a gold medal?
I really like their team. I think they learned from the last Olympics. I went back and looked at the last Olympic team, and it was littered with young guys scoring and college guys scoring goals. And I thought they've learned from that, and they got a few veteran players like Andy Mealy as their captain. Even see a Justin Advocator out there, a Stephen Camphor, so that I think they've learned from how last year they were close last year. I didn't realize that how close they were. Quarterfinal loss in a shootout last year. I think that they're probably going to end up getting Germany again. They gave them fits last game. I could be wrong on that, but Germany's got 8 NHL former players. The U.S. has got 7. It was a challenging game, but I like their makeup, their roster, how they're playing. They're playing fast. They can play heavy if they need to, but they play fast. They got skill. I will say that they beat Canada, which for all my Canadian friends, you always give me trouble when Canada beats U.S. in the women's side. They beat Canada in the men's side. Usually they don't play a lot. You don't see U.S. and Canada play very often in the medal rounds. So that was a statistical anomaly since we're on that frame. But I like that team. Big hockey coming up. We got the women's Canada-U.S. gold. You've got the U.S. and their run. I will say CNN worst tweet of the week to compare this run to the 1980 Olympic team. Not even close. Whoever wrote that tweet should be gone. I mean, the biggest event in the 1900s, in the 20th century, you're going to say that this is no chance. Come on.
No, it's a different tournament. I actually was on a radio station and used that comparison, but just to show that it's absolutely not the same. You do have some college kids that are being part of a really fun run, and that's I think drawing a little bit more attention to the men's tournament than it's gotten in a long time. The last time I remember paying this much attention to the men's tournament was probably 2010 when the U.S. got silver. But I look at this run of this team. It's impressive, but now it's into that single elimination phase. That is one thing that's very difficult to coach for, is the one loss and you're done. I think that there's a lot of good components on this team. I think that the young guns are the leading. There's no doubt the youngest players are the best players on this team. But I do look at the the single elimination component. Now there's just no room for error. Either opponent that is going to play, either Slovakia or Germany, they're going to come off a high. They're going to be coming off a win. Granted, a little less rest than the U.S. has, but it's not. This is not smooth sailing. If anybody thinks that the U.S. men will just cruise to a medal because they're 3-0 and the top overall seed in the next round, they're not there. And there are the other two things I'll mention that the two teams I just mentioned. Both are good. They could give them trouble in a quarterfinal. But there's also Russia is excellent. Czechia, I think, is really good. There's some great teams that they could still face and that could give them fits.
And I think if you look at the Olympics to where it was, I mean, I'm going back to the comparison of 80. I mean, just comparison to a while ago, they really condensed the men's portion of this because of the NHL players. There was two divisions when in 80. They had to play 5 games to get to the medal round. The medal round was only 4 teams. So every game basically was a knockout leading up to it. There weren't this many teams. Like, what do we got? 12 teams in the quarterfinal, or the preliminary 12 teams in the playoffs. There were only 4 way back when. So there's a lot of differences, not even close to what we're dealing with. I mean, even close to the women, they had to play 4 or 5 games to move on to the quarterfinals. I mean, this is just condensed because of the pro players.
Let's also not forget, when we talk about the difference between 1980 and now, how much more of an underdog the U.S. team was in 1980, just on player talent. This group of 15 current college players, most of them are expected to have NHL careers. That was really not on the horizon for most of that 1980 team. We forget now, with a third of the NHL coming from the college ranks, that college players going to the NHL was a lot more of an anomaly, probably 10% or less going back 42 years. But I want to come back one other thing that you mentioned, coaching now for single elimination. Could the U.S. have put together a better lineup than Dave Quinn with Mike Hastings and Brett Larson there for this group of college players?
They've seen it. I mean, they go through the single elimination. NHL coaches don't. Best of 7 is very different than single elimination. And, obviously Mike and Brett both coached in last year's Frozen Four and had to, persevere through that tournament. They persevered through conference tournaments where you get to the semifinals and the championship game and it's one and done. They know how to get through those one and dones. I don't think it's easy though. Even with coaching experience, it's still difficult because, little mistakes or whatever it might be, a game ends up tied and you go to a shootout and it becomes a skills competition to advance. That's a little bit more difficult. You can't predict and even kind of think about how you'll get to that situation.
And don't forget, these guys also coached in the World Juniors too at some point. So they do have some experience in elimination games and on the national stage too. So, David Quinn was with the development program. I mean, I know Brett and Mike's been a head coach. I don't think Brett has, but I think he's been an assistant coach before. So they do have some international experience with single elimination games that maybe Mike Sullivan may not have had.
Let's look at the standings around college hockey in the 6 leagues. Let's start with Atlantic Hockey. It's always tight in that league. It all comes down to the last day of the season. Right now, AIC they could have clinched if they had a win over Army. A 1-0 loss kept them from that. But there are 7 teams separating second place from 8th place. You've been in the middle of that, Derek. What is it like in that league? And is there anybody who might rise to the top out of this mess?
Well, I mean, it's so close. We got 4 games left. There's a possible AIC needs 1 point, the combination of 1 point to clinch again. Congratulations to the job that Eric and Woodward and Schneider have done there. You see people make some big jumps. Sacred Heart got 6 points this weekend, and they made a big move. But there's still a lot different format this year because 6 teams are going to get a bye. So you're really battling to make sure you don't fall in that first round game or games. And you got Niagara, who's tied with Bentley. You got Air Force 1 point back. I'm still going to go sleeper. I got a group of sleepers that, anybody can be a sleeper. And we talked about that in this league right now. Sacred Heart's really good. Army, you don't want to play them. They're going to beat you up. Canisius was there last year. I'm still not counting out RIT. I know they got swept by Merciers this past weekend, but they've got all those super seniors, those 5-year guys that have been in a lot of battles. So that's kind of my analysis. Don't count out RIT. That's my sleeper.
I'll give you just a sleeper, and I don't know how you can say a second place team's a sleeper, but I really like the way that Canisius is playing, and I think that that's a really well coached team. The team that's surprising me right now and might not end up in that top 6, Bentley. They've really fallen off of late.
The Big Ten, you've got Michigan, Minnesota, and Ohio State just being separated by 3 points for first place. This one is a battle for home ice in the final round, and also playing for a bye. But boy. Who do you like in this one? I've got to think you got to like Minnesota maybe to pull that one out after what they did last weekend.
Well, we talked about where they're at, and Ohio State. I mean, there's some big games left for Ohio State still working out. You kind of mentioned this earlier. Don't count out Penn State. I wouldn't want Penn State in a 1-game knockout right now with the ability of throwing Guy Godowski's team putting pucks to the net. They could put up shots, and they're 1 game under 500. I know they're not doing as well in the Big Ten, but that's a team where if we're talking about sleepers, don't sleep on Penn State.
I'm going to second that notion. Don't sleep on Penn State in the tournament. There's no doubt. But in terms of this top 3, who's going to get there? I'm just going to go with the numbers. And it says Minnesota should be the team that wins. They have the easier of the schedule. You're talking about a Michigan team that still has to play both Ohio State and Notre Dame in the last 2 weekends, where Minnesota, they have Penn State and Wisconsin, a little bit different. So I think that you're right, though, Derek. I think in a 1-game tournament scenario, boy, nobody likes a team that can put up 45, 50 shots a game, and that's what Penn State can do.
When we look at the CCHA, Minnesota State and Michigan Tech have separated, and a bit of competition in the middle. I'm not sure that we expected it to be so separated at the top earlier on in the season. Any guess on that for the CCHA?
Well, the funny thing is that we've looked at there's a lot of separation here with 6 points to go. There's a big separation from the top, another separation. Bemidji can't catch Tech. Bowling Green is going to have trouble catching Bemidji. And they're right down the order. I've always thought Bemidji was going to be a team that challenged this year. But I've been told that Michigan Tech is really, really good. My coaches that I talk to in that league say that Michigan Tech, and we're talking about sleeper. I think anybody outside of Minnesota State's the sleeper. So Michigan Tech's really, really good.
Yeah, I agree with you there, Derek. Can we maybe watch out for Bowling Green if they can, get top 4, win that series, and then advance to the single elimination semifinals? Are they a team that can take out Minnesota State? I mean, they got Tech on the road this past weekend, beat them 4-2. They've got a good win in there against Bemidji. Other than that, maybe not a lot of quality to what they've done in their schedule. I guess they beat Bemidji twice this year. Maybe that's a team that you could find that could do something in the playoffs. If they can play like they did this past Saturday, I think that's a big positive.
We talked a lot earlier on about the ECAC. It really comes down to Quinnipiac and Clarkson, who are only a point apart. It's going to be a battle to the last day, probably there too.
Well, if you look at the standings, I think the top 4 are pretty close to being clinched. You got Harvard pretty solid in the 3 spot, Cornell pretty solid in the 4 spot. And after that, you got the 5 through 12 matchups. And RPI, could they, or Colgate, could they catch Cornell? Maybe. Don't count out Cornell, especially when Mike Schaefer gets back. We've talked about that previously. Hopefully he's on his way to recovery. Another team that's been playing pretty well lately, RPI. RPI has been pretty good lately. So the rest, I wouldn't be surprised to see this run true to form. I think there's that much separation once you get down to the bottom end. And that's not to the fault of, other than the fact that those teams didn't play last year. And we've talked about that. So I don't see a lot of upsets moving forward and a lot of changes in the standings there.
Schools, you keep stealing my thunder. I was going to kind of talk about RPI as a team. You know, they beat Cornell last Friday. They got a win not too long ago against Harvard in there. I mean, they're winning some games. They beat Vermont on the road, you know, not the exact, you know, not a powerhouse, but even a 1-0 loss though to Quinnipiac. They played Quinnipiac, a very good team, tight. You know, they've won some games, especially of late. I feel like Dave Smith always kind of gets his team geared for the playoffs, and they're in a good position right now.
Well, Hockey East, Jim, the top 6, Lowell, Umass, BU, UConn, Merrimack, and Northeastern, separated by 5 points, although UMass and UConn have games in hand. Boy, this is a hard one to handicap, huh?
It is, and this goes back to what I said way back in the first segment, that I think, you know, 1 through 11, I think that any team can win on any given night. And you're also looking at a playoff format that has switched from best of 3 in the first 2 rounds to single elimination in the first rounds. It was what they used last year, you know, because of the pandemic, but they decided not to switch back. ADs liked the single game way too much. I feel like the top of that league is pretty good, but, you know, you're talking about, you know, maybe Merrimack is a road team, you know, gets a home game in the first round, wins it, and then they're a road team in that second game, you know, in the quarterfinals with the chance to go to the Garden. I love Merrimack. That's a team that has played well. They have a lot of speed. We talked to their coach recently on one of our Spotlight podcasts, and, you know, Scotty Boric, he's an experienced coach. He's been through a lot, and he knows how to gear up his team game to game. They don't seem to get caught up in losses. They move on after, you know, some losses, that some of the hits they take along the way, and they bounce right back. So I think that's a very dangerous team to look for. Not a top 4 team right now, really close. Listen, they get one weekend where they sweep it. They could, you know, easily jump up into 2nd or 3rd place in that league. But, you know, you mentioned it, at UMass and UConn probably have the biggest advantage with some games in hand to be played, but you got to win those games as well. So I think that right now we're still looking at a standings that's close, but keep an eye on Merrimack.
Well, you took my thunder, so I'll change down the line. Providence. Providence has a chance still as an at-large, but they're 7th right now in the standings. I don't think they can't be caught by 8, but they can still rise as far as, I think, probably 4th or 5th. But you know, at 18, 12, and 2, I mean, we're talking about Hockey East here, and we just keep forgetting about them. We talked about Lowell. We haven't talked about UMass today because we think that they're pretty solid, but Providence, don't count on them. Don't count them out. They've got a lot of experience there, and they've known how to win.
Let's wrap with the NCHC, probably coming down to Denver and North Dakota, just 2 points apart. But you look below that, Western Michigan, only 5 points behind North Dakota. They're still within reach of that too.
You know, North Dakota, here's a team that, you know, is right on the NCAA bubble. And you realize that it's mostly probably because of out of conference. In the conference, they're solid. And, you know, they're gaining win after win, and keeping pace with Denver, finding a way to keep a pace with a Denver team that went on such a run here. That's a dangerous team, you know, but is there an easy team in the NCHC? I'm not sure. You know, we look at Miami beating Omaha, but now I'm kind of out on how good Omaha is. CC, maybe they're not great, but, you know, you're talking St. Cloud down in 5th place. That's a team that was in the Frozen Four in the national title game last year. If there's a sleeper in this league that people aren't talking about right now, Brett Larson's St. Cloud team would scare me.
Once again, you're going to take my thunder. I'm going to go the opposite. You just mentioned Omaha. They were right in the teens for a while, you know, the upper teens. And I think they've taken a nosedive. We brought up Bentley earlier. Now you got St. Cloud. Omaha that's really taken that tumble. How you can forget about St. Cloud after the start they had, we can't. But we also haven't talked much about Minnesota Duluth. We've been marks for Denver. I've been a mark for Western Michigan. Not much Minnesota Duluth talk. So if we're, wow, what a first round series, 4-5 right now. If it ends that way, Duluth, St. Cloud. I don't know if there's any way that changes very much. That's a powerhouse series right there.
Probably a 3-game series with the third game going multiple OTs.
I think that's a safe bet.
Well, we're going to wrap it up there with that lightning round. This has been brought to you by DCU Digital Federal Credit Union. What will DCU mean to you? Find out today by visiting dcu.org. Membership required. For Derek Schooley, for Jim Connelly, I'm Ed Trefzger, and we'll catch you next time.
This has been the USCHO Weekend Review Podcast, a production of U.S. College Hockey Online. Visit uscho.com/podcasts to listen or subscribe.